This podcast is brought to you by Danette May and Mindful Health LLC, featuring Danette May's top superfood product from her Earth Echo Foods line, Cacao Bliss. Nothing feels better than being able to enjoy rich, smooth, creamy chocolate and knowing you're doing something great for your body. It starts with 100% organic cacao beans that are naturally kissed by the sun, maintaining its miraculous health benefits. It's then blended with turmeric, MCT oil, coconut, Himalayan sea salt, cinnamon, and black pepper for the perfect blend to make you feel your best. The result? Fall in love with a truly decadent, healthy, guilt-free chocolate, removing cravings, facilitating weight loss, boosting your energy, and reducing inflammation with one simple drink. Not only that, it's friendly to paleo, gluten-free, keto, vegan, and vegetarian diets. For the last 8 years, Earth Echo Foods has been a leader in the superfoods market and are proud to have served millions of customers worldwide. Use the code TRANSPARENT and receive 15% off your purchase today. Go to earthechofoods.com/transparent with Tina. Hi, and welcome to Transparent with Tina. I am Tina Marks, your host. Today's guest is a psychologist, author, speaker, coach, and podcaster. And she's just been named the #1 leading expert in resiliency in the world. Today, she's going to share her 5 practices that lead you to be the most resilient you. Up next, Dr. Taryn Stejskal. Welcome, Dr. Taryn Marie. Nice to see you.
It's so nice to see you.
Oh, thank you. I like that kind of greeting.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm so excited and happy to be here with you today. Thanks so much for inviting me.
Oh, absolutely. I feel exactly the same way. I mean, you have done a lot in your life. You've overcome a lot, even though you don't use that word, which we're going to get into later. You don't say overcome. You did something else. I'm going to leave that up until later in the interview. But
spoiler alert.
Yeah. So, as I said in your intro, you're a psychologist, you're an author, you're a speaker, you're a coach, and a podcaster. Okay. So we always start with your backstory. How did you find your purpose, and which one came first? I think it was you were a psychologist first, correct?
Well, that's a really, as with all questions, that's a very interesting question. So I did pre and postdoctoral fellowships actually in neuropsychology.
Yes.
And so I thought, it's this whole question of purpose is fascinating, isn't it? Because
yes.
I feel like relative to purpose, we're all either trying to find it, evolving what is that purpose, to borrow from the Simon Sinek, what is our why?
Yes.
And if we found it, we're actively, aligning with our purpose, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, so often when we talk about purpose, we use also finite language, right? Around this sort of like once and for all, right? Like I'm going to sort of like find my purpose and then we're going to
like park it and leave it, right?
Yeah. Right.
I'm with you. It's like, it's constantly evolving.
It's constantly evolving. And so every time in my life, I've thought that I've found my purpose, call it when I get to that sort of figurative summit of purpose, I'd be like, oh, this is a very nice view from the summit of my purpose. And oh, look at that mountain over there. I think I might like to climb that next. Right. So it's been this very, like, for me, a very iterative process. And one more thing I'll just say sort of high level before I get into specifics. I also find, and I wonder if you find this, Tina, in your work as a coach, I find that purpose is a very exciting, it's a very exciting, enlivening thing for people. It's also very painful for people who don't know what it is, haven't found it, haven't been able to capture it. It's there's a lot of churn around purpose and sadness and difficulty and loss too, that I think is important to voice.
I'm really glad that you brought that up. And you know what? I share similarities with you because I read somewhere, I think it was on your website, that from a very young age, you couldn't wait for the phone to ring, for your friends to call you up, and basically you're coaching them, right?
Right.
And you know, when I get asked that question, how long have you been a coach? I'm like, how long have I not been a coach? I felt
That's
the
right.
same way. I mean, what lights me up is figuring out the blocks in somebody. Like, I have an innate ability to see a block in somebody right away. Not so much myself, but you know, that's part of the course, right? But I find so much fulfillment in that, and it's almost like a puzzle. It's like something that really intrigues me, and I feel like I'm good at it, and that was like my gift. So I remember being very, very lost in my early adult years. I mean, I kept going from job to job to job, and everybody in my family just thought I was flaky. You know what I mean? And I'm like, no, I'm not. I have a very active mind and I'm very passionate. So I've got to be passionate about what I do. Otherwise I will get bored and I'll move on. And I remember thinking, back then there weren't coaches. There were just psychologists, and I hadn't gotten to college. And I'm like, and I hated school. Couldn't stand school. I've got 4 different kinds of ADD. So you can imagine going to school. And I'm thinking, oh, I'd have to go to 4 years university, and then I'd have to go 4 more years. So that was just like basically off the table. I knew I wanted to help people, but I didn't know to what capacity. So all those years, yes, I struggled. I felt like everybody else is getting ahead. Everybody's finding their path. And I wasn't. And why? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? You know, why everybody else is doing this? You know, when you're kind of singulared out and it's not happening for you, and you feel like life's passing you by, and it can be a real struggle. I'm in complete agreement.
Yeah. So true. And I think you highlight so many really important kind of elements, sort of on the well-known journey of purpose, call it, the lesser well-known or lesser talked about elements of that are the pain and the struggle and the social comparison, you know, that you called out, kind of at least feeling like everyone else is excelling and you're the only one. And
it's lonely.
You know, it's lonely, and everybody else seems happy doing what they're doing. And you had this moment of feeling unfulfilled, and people thought you were flaky, but it was really more about, you know, you needed to have a level of passion and conviction and connection to the work that you're doing. So that sense oftentimes of being misunderstood. So I love that you brought all of those things.
And I couldn't even make a relationship work. So it's like I wasn't even like married and had the children thing down, right? So I didn't have the career down, and I didn't have that side down either. So yeah,
Well, I don't know about you, but I'm immensely thankful for all the things that I wanted to work that didn't.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. You know what? You know, you and I were talking before we started recording, and I was saying that faith is in the forefront of my life, absolutely, hands down. And I had to go through all this to find my faith, to realize how important it is.
Yeah.
And I do believe everything happens for a reason. And I think you're missing the boat if you are not learning your lessons. Because, you know, I was just saying today, my day started off like crazy. I was doing a IG Live giveaway, and my co-host, who was supposed to be, she's the founder of the company that we were giving away the product, we got our lines crossed and she could not make it. And the old me would have gone into a tailspin. What? Oh my, you know, and I said, I think that challenges sometimes are there just to really show you as a benchmark how far you've come. Because all of a sudden it dawned on me, in the midst of all this, instead of getting carried away with the anxiety and what am I going to do, and the panic or the anger, anger and pointing fingers, right? Because that would be the old me. I stopped and I went, wow, this is fine. You know, the show must go on. And it was fine. The world didn't end. But you know what? The old me, it always ended. I mean, I would put such charge behind anything that didn't go according to plan. Anything.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and this is one of my favorite, my focus, as you know, is being, I guess we're saying, I've gotten some awards recently that say I'm the #1 international expert on resilience. So working on stepping into that title. I appreciate those awards. And it's hard to say. It's hard to say out loud, and exciting to say. And one of the really powerful elements that we get to talk about in the context of resilience is challenge, is change, is complexity. And just to sort of wax philosophical for just a moment, I find that a lot of the work that's being done on resilience today doesn't resonate with me, and it's sort of like, we're making cupcakes and we're doing, and I think there can be this, there can be this tendency to gloss over, to sort of whitewash the messy, uncertain, chaotic, traumatic, disappointing moments that are at the nucleus of that challenge, change, and complexity that absolutely catalyze our ability to demonstrate and to harness and to enhance our resilience. And so I love to talk about these moments of challenge, because rather than sort of like whitewash or gloss over them, right? That is really the moment when we're being formed. And what I like to say about challenge is, challenge exists, in large part for us to continue to form ourselves as humans. Proust, who was a poet, you and those of you listening may know, when he looked back at his life, he was like, the time I was happy, that was all crap. I didn't learn anything. It was the it was the moments of suffering that like it was, it's heart-wrenching, it's searing pain, and it's also the moments when we are truly being formed. And I like to say that when we face challenge, we get to move from the mindset of seeing challenge as the period at the end of the sentence, like the end, to seeing, challenge is the comma in the sentence that is the invitation of, do we want to go on?
Yes.
How much do we want this? And when we start to see challenge, to your point, as the comma, as the necessary stuff that's part of our formation and growth, then we have a different relationship with those moments.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It all boils down to your perspective on what the challenge signifies to you. Right. I heard recently that it's like God's way of working on you, a challenge, right? And it's like molding you. And that's exactly what it is, because it's known that we don't change unless it's painful enough. Because when you're comfortable, I tell all of my clients, I said, get used to being uncomfortable as your new normal. And, your first reaction is like, I don't want to feel uncomfortable the rest of my life. I said, yes, but it's not going to feel uncomfortable the rest of your life. It's going to become your new normal. So like I have several clients right now doing a challenge, a 30-day challenge where they face one fear every day. Okay. And the one that is excelling in this, she was the first one to start it. She said, yeah, I said, is it starting to feel habitual now? She goes, yeah, it's like when I don't want to do something, it's like now I don't let myself get away with not doing it, because, she's been I think she's on day 16 or 17. And it's like, wouldn't that be wonderful? If it's like, think about it, if you're facing one fear every day, and I wrote about this in my book as one of the principles, you're not going to really be scared of much anymore, because, you're building up that muscle instead of shrinking in front of fear. You just rise to the challenge. I mean, you're going to do one of the two. Okay, you're either going to rise to the occasion or you're going to shrink away from it. So if you're building up that muscle, it's going to seem normal to just, of course, just face it, just like I did today. And the more that you put on your plate, the easier it is to do. So when the real challenges, like maybe a health challenge or a death in the family or something like that, you know, it's like it pales so much in a comparison to something like that.
Absolutely.
So tell me why you are the expert in why they say that you're the expert in. Sorry, just lost my train of thought. Yeah, the expert.
I'll help you. I'll help you out. It'll help me to practice saying it out loud.
Yeah. So yeah, there we go. That's the reason I did that. See, it was my little trick.
I mean, what an amazing coach you are. I didn't even, even know you were doing that to help me. How gracious of you.
I know. I'm an empath.
Yes. Yeah. The number one international expert on resilience.
Resilience.
Yeah.
Resilience. Yes. So tell us, how did you get that title? I mean, what is it about you, that gained you that title?
Yeah, it's a solid question. It's got a lot of merit for sure. So, a decade and a half ago, I couldn't, well, longer actually, but I couldn't understand what the word resilience meant, right? So, for you, Tina, and for the listeners that are joining us for this episode, I grew up in a time where there was no internet. I know it's weird to think about.
Me too.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we had these things, I don't know if you had them, called encyclopedias.
Yes, absolutely. I did all my school reports with encyclopedias, right? Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So we had these things called encyclopedias, and we also had this other thing that was called a dictionary.
Yes.
And we had just gotten rid of our butter churn. I'm just kidding.
Can I say, hold your thought, but I got to say one thing about the dictionary. My dad used to say, you don't know that word? Go look it up. I'm like,
that's
how
right.
am I supposed to look it up if I don't know to spell it?
Yeah, that's right. I know. Spent a lot of time in there.
Right.
So I did that. I looked up, my dad probably said something similar to me. And so I went to look it up, and it was a very circular definition. It was like resilience means to be resilient. And, then you look up resilient, and it's like to demonstrate resilience. And I was like, okay, this doesn't make any darn sense.
Going around the circle. Yeah,
exactly. A circular definition. And so when I was doing my fellowship, my pre and postdoctoral fellowships, I was working with patients and their families that had sustained brain injuries and spinal cord injuries, neurological injuries. And we had patients, it's a very long-term rehabilitation, and, months and years, not weeks, like a broken arm. And so we had people coming into our outpatient clinic who had experienced their injury, months or years before. And what was really fascinating and important for me at that moment is the patients that were coming in at that time, I'd look at their sort of chart, and I'd look at them, and their prognosis might be one thing. However, the person that was sitting in front of me often was doing better than we thought, or not as well as we thought, but rarely were we hitting the bullseye of accurate prognosis. And so this seemed important to me for two reasons. One, for the folks that were doing better than we thought, I was like, what can we learn from these folks that we can share with the rest of our patients? And for the folks that weren't doing as well, I thought, what can we learn from these folks about, what not to do, or what might, sort of get in the way of people's rehabilitation. And the second thing was, I really wanted us to be able to provide more accurate prognosis, more accurate information for people at the time of injury, because that's so important when there's an unexpected injury like that, a stroke or an aneurysm or a car accident. We're on every word that the medical community tells us. It's just a really important time. So we did this study. I was at an academic teaching hospital where we looked at all of the data. We looked at gender, we looked at socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, age, all the things. And do you know, the one thing that made the biggest difference for people was having access to reliable transportation. Yeah. Having access to reliable transportation was the difference, statistically speaking, between living in an assisted care facility or being able to live independently sometime after an injury, And this makes sense when you think about it, because if you have access to reliable transportation, you can get to your appointments, you can get to the therapies, you can get the services and the resources, right?
Okay.
So I left my fellowship, a decade and a half ago, and I'm still thinking about this concept of resilience. And I'm thinking we're not all going to have brain injuries or spinal cord injuries. And thank goodness for that, because that's a very challenging rehabilitation. But as you pointed out, we will all face challenge, change, and complexity.
Mm-hmm.
And so in those moments of inherent challenge, change, and complexity, it's not if, it's when, what will be our version of reliable transportation? What will be our thing or
Oh, I see where you're going with this. Because I was
see what
like,
I did
where are
there?
you going? Yeah, yes, I did. I was
You're
like,
like-
where's she going with this?
You're like, note to the team, we're going to need to edit out about 10 minutes of this interview.
No, because I'm sure everybody that's listening was going, where is she going with this? How does transportation have to do with resiliency? But absolutely. So
Indeed.
how do you get there?
Yeah.
How do you get through the challenges? What are the tools that you need? Yes.
And it's actually sort of like a fascinating sort of figurative element of speech, right? Like what transports us,
Yes.
right, from
Yes.
that challenge to resilience.
Right.
And so now, I've interviewed hundreds of people and collected thousands of pieces of data asking people about a time when they effectively faced.
How did they get through it?
Indeed.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah. And so that has given rise to, right, all of this sort of qualitative research that I've collected, hundreds of people, thousands of pieces of data, to the 5 practices of particularly resilient people. And so I'm one of the few people, again, this is like, I'm working on saying this out loud. I'm one of the few people across the globe that has created a structured, evidence-based framework for what are the specific behaviors that we can engage in, that any of us can engage in.
Yes.
Anytime challenge, change, and complexity shows up in our lives. And these are the 5 practices of particularly resilient people. So it gives me, going back to your question, it makes me the #1 expert on resilience across the globe.
So let me ask you, are these practices only put into place when you're faced with a challenge, or are these practices that you use every single day? So when you are faced with a challenge, you, like I was saying about facing one fear every day. So it's like that will, when it does arise, maybe a larger fear, you're kind of already grounded in that. So see, these are practices, you're nodding your head. So these are practices that you use every day.
Yeah, absolutely. They're called practices intentionally, right? Because we become what we practice.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Right. Yeah.
I do a morning routine, based on the miracle morning, the journaling, the visualization, exercise, everything. And that really does keep me in balance. And I've said this a million times before. Every single time, not every single time, but I would say 99.9% of the time when I get on with a Zoom with a client and they've gone sideways, it's because they've stopped doing their morning routine. And oftentimes everybody, when they stop doing it, it's like, we've all been there. I got this now. I don't need it anymore, including myself. I don't need to do that anymore. Okay, got it down. I got it. And then all of a sudden, you have to be kind of keep putting that back in. Are you going to share with us those? I know that you have, your podcast, and you have a course. It's called Flourish or Fold, the 5 practices of particularly resilient people. That's your new book coming out, right? You also have a course named the same thing.
Yep.
And then your podcast is Flourish or Fold. So are you able to tell us what the 5 principles are?
Absolutely, positively.
Oh, right on. Okay, good.
Yeah, it's no secret.
Okay.
And in fact, the book and the course and the podcast, they're all meant, Tina, to share these principles, to share these practices more widely with the world. Because what happened is I did this research, and I've worked for a variety of Fortune 100 companies. Most recently, I headed up executive development and talent strategy at Nike for the, kind of C-suite and top vice presidents in that organization. And so what's happened with this sort of research that I've been conducting is it's really primarily been in the hands of the most elite executives, well-known athletes.
They're all privy to it, is what you're saying.
Right. It's folks with a lot of privilege have then had opportunity to be exposed to this work that I've done. And I've seen the tremendous kind of power of being able to share these principles with these individuals. And I thought, and yet we want to give everyone access,
exactly.
to this and to be able to meet people where they are. And so whether that's through a podcast, which is free, or a book, which will, be somewhere between $15 and $25 paperback or hard copy, or, the course, which is at a higher price point, we want to be able to give people up, and we have a lot of free content on our website and on our social, to really give people an opportunity to interact with these principles.
To everybody get the same information, but on like different levels and different price scales. Yes, I love that. I love that.
Exactly. So the 5 practices, so the first practice that emerged in this research, I was blown away. And candidly, I went back to try to recode the data, because I was like, no, it's got to be something else. I didn't want it to be. I didn't want it to be what it was, and what it was vulnerability.
Being the ability to be vulnerable.
And I was like, darn it, because that's not an area where I'm strong.
Yeah, I don't think anybody is.
Yeah, and
hurts. It's like, ouch.
Yeah. Like, it hurts. Going back to your conversation about fear, it's scary. It's uncomfortable. It's weird. It's, vulnerability in its own right isn't weird, but it feels weird, at least to me. And I think to a lot of people who kind of are stepping into their vulnerability. And what's been interesting about that is vulnerability is actually that's a squishy term too. Like, when we say vulnerability, what the heck do we mean by that?
Well, the first thing that I thought of, which is the first principle in my book, is truth. Recognize your truth. Okay.
Ooh.
Because think about it. I mean, being vulnerable is really being able to speak your truth.
That's right.
Right. But we don't want to speak our truth because how we're going to be perceived by it, how somebody's going to judge us or not, or whatever. So that's what I think.
I love how you shared that, how you put those two concepts together. I think you're exactly right. What has emerged as kind of the definition of what is this vulnerability that people have shared when I ask people, how do they effectively address challenge? It's, to your point around truth, it's allowing our inside self, our thoughts, our feelings, our experience, to the greatest extent possible, to be shared, our internal self to be shared externally.
Yes, exactly.
With the world, right?
But you have to be okay with, you have to embrace yourself. If you can embrace yourself first, flaws and all, I was journaling about this the other day. You can embrace that, then it's much easier to become vulnerable. It's when you don't embrace who you are, because we like to embrace the beautiful parts of ourselves, but we all have the shadow. I call them shadow sides of ourselves that we'd just want them to go away. And the more that we turn our backs on the shadow self, it's the more that they just keep rearing their head because they need to be healed or heard or whatever. Right. So yeah, I think that for me anyway, that's what makes, and you know what, that's another reason I do this podcast. And that's why it's called Transparent with Tina. It keeps me in alignment. Keeps me vulnerable. It keeps me on track. It keeps me speaking my truth because, I seriously can't have a podcast called Transparent with Tina if I'm not willing to share my own truth and stories.
Fair point. Fair point indeed. Yeah.
Okay. So what's number 2?
Yeah. Well, what I'll just say about vulnerability is, I love what you said about there's so much there, right? There's self-love, the shadow parts of ourselves that you talked about. There's also this, there's the unacknowledged, parts of ourselves, the parts that we've sort of quarantined or put in a container, or things that we've like split off from.
Yes.
So like I worked with a woman who had an unacknowledged sexual assault, and she couldn't figure out why she couldn't get close to, in this case, she's a heterosexual woman. She couldn't figure out why she couldn't get close to men in relationships. She couldn't figure out why she couldn't trust people, why she was afraid of the dark. And when we started doing this work on vulnerability, what came up for her is this unacknowledged sexual assault that she had essentially repressed, took place in her teens. And part of that coherence in her vulnerability was bringing those unacknowledged parts of herself back into her whole person, and then allowing herself to operate, from a place of congruence, right? And congruence in vulnerability is it's a lifelong pursuit, right? To, as closely as possible, allow our inside self to match the outside self that we share to the world. And in certain relationships and environments and circumstances, that will obviously be easier than others.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
And last part on vulnerability, there is a reason why vulnerability is hard, right? Like if it was easy, Brene Brown would have stood up on the TEDx stage and said, vulnerability is amazing and it leads to living a wholehearted life, and everybody go do this. And we'd all be living these fabulously vulnerable lives. But that's not what's happened. In large part, because what's also come out of my work is this concept of the vulnerability bias. And what the vulnerability bias tells us is that we all have resilient stories. We all have an imaginary piece of paper that says, people would think I was crazy if, ... And then there's a blank there, right? We can all like write one thing in there that we have a resilient story that, we haven't felt fully comfortable with sharing with the world. And then when we have the courage to share that with the world, there's this vulnerability bias, right? And the vulnerability bias says, okay, Tina was transparent. She shared her resilient story. So I think more of Tina. Tina's credibility rises in my eyes. And yet, right, when I then think about following suit, following your leadership and telling my resilient story, I think, but even though I think more of Tina, I fear the opposite will be true. That when I tell my resilient story, it won't have that impact. And the cognitive bias, to sound like a real psychologist when I say that, is that we think if in some circles, when we tell a resilient story, not only will our credibility be diminished, people won't, it's the 3 L's. People won't like us, they won't love us, and they might leave. And so this threat of loss or abandonment is very core. And that's what keeps us in our vulnerability cage. So going back to what you were saying about facing fear, vulnerability is very much about allowing ourselves to tell our resilient stories to the right people, to the people who've earned the right to hear those stories, and to further create that coherence between inside and outside self. Yes.
Exactly. Just to add to that, in my book, I talk about sharing your dreams and goals, because don't share them. There are people out there that are dream smashers. Be very, very careful who you share your dreams and goals with, because people that have not achieved their dreams and goals are, threatened by that. And so, you're never going to meet a successful person that's not going to be willing to help or share their information. It's the people that have not achieved what they want to in their lives, that it's like they're the ones that are like, it reminds them of their own inability to bring forward their dreams. This podcast is brought to you by Danette May and Mindful Health LLC, featuring Danette May's top superfood product from her Earth Echo Foods line, Cacao Bliss. Nothing feels better than being able to enjoy rich, smooth, creamy chocolate and knowing you're doing something great for your body. It starts with 100% organic cacao beans that are naturally kissed by the sun, maintaining its miraculous health benefits. It's then blended with turmeric, MCT oil, coconut, Himalayan sea salt, cinnamon, and black pepper for the perfect blend to make you feel your best. The result? Fall in love with a truly decadent, healthy, guilt-free chocolate, removing cravings, facilitating weight loss, boosting your energy, and reducing inflammation with one simple drink. Not only that, it's friendly to paleo, gluten-free, keto, vegan, and vegetarian diets. For the last 8 years, Earth Echo Foods has been a leader in the superfoods market and are proud to have served millions of customers worldwide. Use the code TRANSPARENT and receive 15% off your purchase today. Go to earthechofoods.com/transparent with Tina.
So, a lot there with vulnerability.
Yes.
And ourselves.
Yeah.
Second practice is productive perseverance. This is the intelligent pursuit of a goal, knowing when in the face of challenge to, persevere, if you will, and when in the face of diminishing returns to pivot in a new direction or sort of craft that plan B. And that's also tough, right? It's very much an art and a science.
That, it really is, because, again, in my book, I wrote, I don't believe in plan B. And I wrote this book in 2011 because I feel like if you have a plan B, then you're not believing in your plan A. But I think there is a difference. I think that, you can't just keep beating your head in the wall if one path is not working. I mean, it's like, it's the universe's way, God's way, whatever, saying, hey, no, look over here. You're missing something.
Yeah.
Right? But it doesn't mean that to completely change your trajectory and go, I want to be a psychologist. My backup plan is to do something like safe. That's kind of what I meant for like the plan B that I don't believe in, because I think it's too easy of an out to give yourself. That if you have that plan B, that's just an easier career or purpose or whatever it is, then I don't think you're ever going to gain the courage to really follow through with plan A, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes to everything. And yes, to your point, there's
but it is a fine line. Like you said, it is a fine line to go, where is that point?
Yeah. And I love what you're saying. There's a lot of research too that backs up exactly what you're saying. And, so this idea of like, why you should burn your plan B is a really important conversation. Arnold Schwarzenegger said when he was training for like, was it like Mr. Universe or something like that? He was, I think to that point, relatively unknown kind of in the bodybuilding world. And he said he didn't have a plan B. Like
that's right. There wasn't another option. If there's not another option, you're going to make, this show is a testament. I've been doing this for a long time. I mean, I had 3 local talk shows, 8 years ago, and I shared that I lost everything. So the last thing you would think that I'd be doing is be saying an entrepreneur. You'd think I'd be like, go do something safe and go get a steady paycheck and stuff like that. But you know what? It's just not my nature. Just not my nature. And it's just like, I know that this was a stamp, this was a privilege, but it was a stamp on my heart that this is my purpose. And, I can't turn my back on the truth, which that is the truth. I think doing anything else would be not only a disservice to myself, but everybody else.
Sure. Yeah. I love that. Yes. So the research would suggest that, when we have a plan B, we siphon off some energy, mental energy or, toward that plan B, and it takes away from the full force of our focus on.
Never thought about it that way. That's so true. You start siphoning it off. You take some energy and go, here, I'm going to put this over here because this seems safer. Right. And then before you know it, you're depleted to put the energy into the plan A, which is going to take all your energy if you really, especially if you have a big dream. I don't think most people allow themselves to dream big enough.
Yeah.
I think they're afraid.
Yeah. Well, and what comes up a lot in this conversation too, especially for entrepreneurs, which I would imagine is a sort of significant constituent of your audience, a lot of people say at this point, or ask at this point, okay, well, I've got my day job and I've got my side hustle, and I want to get rid of my day job and make my side hustle the sort of full-time thing, right? The thing that I spend the full complement of my time on. And, so what do I do? And so I think this is a slightly different conversation than the plan B. And it's also worth mentioning because there's a lot of people who have or get to kind of hold on to that day job as a stabilizing force to pay their mortgage, pay their rent, take care of their children, contribute to their household, while still building and growing, right, the company and the thing that they ultimately feel most passionate about creating. And I think when we look at the people that have been successful, or arguably most successful in that, right, like Stephen King, continued to work at a gas station, I think, until one of his books became a bestseller. Or Sarah Blakely, founder of Spanx, she continued to work at her day job until she had really nailed her IP and had clear customers. And so there is this like sort of plan A, plan B conversation that's so important. And it's also important to talk about how we can sort of keep a foot in two canoes for a period of time for one investment to be able to feed the other until we're really able to step into the full complement of that purpose full time.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I have clients that are doing that right now, but I find that the quicker the transition, the more likely they're actually going to do it. I think if it takes too long, they're just going to fall into the fear and say, they're going to give up.
Yeah. I think it also depends on the sort of size and, audacity. I was like, audaciousness. I think it also depends on the size and audacity of the goal. Right. When our goals are large, when we have a lot of audacity, those things just by nature of the breadth and heft of what we're creating can take longer, right?
Right.
And as an entrepreneur, I know as an entrepreneur, everything takes about 2 to 2.5 to 3 times longer than I think, and costs about 5 times as much.
Right. And that's why when you are making that transition, you really got to step on the gas. I had a client that we were talking about this today, and she said, well, I'll get started on that next week. And it was something that was very important to her that's going to take a while. And I said, why would you put it off till next week? Well, I'm a little afraid. It's like, I said, well, whenever you feel that fear and you don't want to do it, think about that you're just adding more time on you getting this done. Well, I never thought about it that way. So, I mean, procrastination is a killer, as you know. It's a killer for, creativeness. It's just not a good situation.
Yeah. Someday isn't a day. I like to say, Monday's a day, Tuesday's a day.
So someday's not a day.
Someday's not a day.
All right. So what's the third? We need to get through these because I've still got more questions for you. So what are the other 3? We've covered 2, right?
Yeah, you're tracking. So the third one is connection. And by the time we get to connection, people are like, oh, thank God, something easy. Vulnerability, that seems scary. Productive perseverance, that's a lot of alliteration, Dr. Taryn. And then we get to connection and they're like, I got that, but actually connection might be actually one of the hardest practices. And here's why. Because connection, like the other 2, is about navigating this sort of paradox, right? The paradox in connection is our connection to our internal selves, our intuition, our worth, our value, desires, and then how we navigate this internal connection with the external connections that we have with others, their desires, their expectations, and sort of in that intersection, right? How we navigate our internal connection and, to your point earlier, right, maintain that sense of truth and integrity with ourselves while also maintaining the relationships externally that are important to us.
Right, exactly. So within, so without, basically, right? The connection internally first. I mean, somebody said to me today, you know, you want to attract the right person, be your own best friend first. Then you're going to attract that person, right? But we've been taught to do it the opposite way.
That's right. Someone else said this better than I am about to, but rather than seeking the one, it's about becoming
the one. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. You want Mr. Right, become Mrs. Right. Same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. So the vulnerability, what was it? The productive
perseverance.
Perseverance.
Yeah, the intelligent pursuit of a goal. Mm-hmm.
All right. Connection. And then,
yes.
And then 4 is what?
Gratiosity.
Like gratitude.
Like gratitude plus generosity.
Oh,
gratiosity. It's a new word.
Did you make it up?
I sure did.
Did you really?
I did.
Oh, that's funny. Okay.
Yeah.
So gratitude with generosity.
Yeah.
I like that. Basically, you're getting out of, when you're generous, you're getting out of your own way, right?
That's right. It's this idea of being able to look on our circumstances, our challenge, change, and complexity, typically after some time, because we're not like in the midst of challenge being like, I'm so glad I have a flat tire. I'm learning so much, you know, but it's like, you know, we get some distance from that challenge and we can find the gratitude in those moments, even if we wouldn't have chosen, you know, that circumstances, the job loss, the health diagnosis. Were you going to say something about that?
Yeah, I was going to say, you know what helps me when I do that? I
want to know.
It can always be worse.
I try not to say that out loud because then I find that it gets worse.
Really? No, I don't find that. I never used to do that. I'd be like I said, it would be like the end of the world. But now I go, you know what? Yeah, it's not fun, but it could have been worse, you know?
Yeah.
I think it can always be worse. So, and then the generosity. I love that. Gratiosity.
Yeah. So generosity then is about sharing our resilient stories with others, you know, from a place of generosity so that others can learn vicariously through our experiences, you know?
And that's why, like you were asking me before the show, that's why I have this show. So people can identify with that, right? It's almost your responsibility. That's the way I look at it. You know, in the Bible, it says, when you've learned the truth, it's your responsibility to bring that forward. And it almost is, you know, don't keep it to yourself. I mean, you should share that. But also when you share it, it helps other people. But by you repeating it, it also kind of becomes more ingrained in you, like on a cellular level. Right?
Yeah, that's right. I think the telling of the story requires that we crystallize the lessons, I think, in a compelling way to share with others. And then that also becomes part of our kind of storytelling or narrative. I
love that. I love the way that you worded that. Yeah, articulated that. That's fantastic. Yes, so true. And the more you tell it, right, the better you are at articulating it. And the more, again, it gets ingrained. You know, I totally believe when you help other people, you help yourself. The problem is we've been taught to help ourselves first. No, I think, you know, I wake up, first thing I usually say is, show me how I can best serve today. Not what can I get today? Because you know what? Don't worry about getting. If you just think about serving, it's just the law of reciprocity. What's the word I'm trying to say?
Reciprocity.
Yeah, I've never been able to say it. Say it again.
I'm there with you. I've got a couple of those words in my vocabulary too. I'm going to say something else. Yeah. Okay. You know, I think it's an important conversation, right? This sort of like balance, if you will, of give versus get.
Yes.
You know, I'll sort of play devil's advocate for a moment, which is like, we're sort of in the, not sort of, we're minus the sort of, we're in the midst of this crisis here in the United States and in some ways largely globally, where we're seeing more burnout, more exhaustion, more loneliness, more anxiety than we've ever seen, you know, sort of to date. And so I think really calibrating where we are and what we need in that moment to sustain ourselves. And many times, to your point, it's like not focusing on the get, but focusing on like what I can give. And I think there's a lot of people out there who have like overgiven, we've depleted ourselves. And so then part of that element of sustaining ourselves as humans is like, what energy can we call back to ourselves to ensure that we're restoring, our person before we go out and give more?
Oh yeah. You have to regroup. And yes, you cannot deplete yourself. You cannot deplete yourself. I mean, that, you've heard it 1,000 times, like on the airplane, give your oxygen to yourself first before you give it to your child. Same thing, right? I mean, and that's another false, learned behavior is it's being selfish if you think of yourself first. It's, and I'm telling you, I feel like most of the things that we've been taught and conditioned to believe are just backwards. If you just turn it the other way around, that's the way it really is supposed to be, perceived and learned.
Well, I think there's a really interesting, so this is something I'm starting to explore because I'm starting to really apply these 5 practices to the concepts of burnout and overwhelm and exhaustion. I'm doing a lot of work with clients on this. And, when we kind of think about this continuum, right? There's selfish, right? Which is like putting yourself before all others. And then there's selfless, which is putting everyone else before us, right?
Yeah.
And, Glennon Doyle, I think, I would say famously talks about selfless, right? In her book, Untamed, where she talks about the highest compliment that's often given to women is like, she's so selfless. We're conditioning, this sort of, response in our society that women should aspire to lose themselves. And that's the highest compliment. So we've got selfish and selfless on this continuum. And so one of the things that I'm exploring is like, how can we sort of calibrate for the middle, which is like self-full. I don't know that that's the right word, but that's where I am right now, which is like self-full. So how can we find this balance? And it's a nuanced balance for each of us, right? To sort of titrate, how can I give and get on a sort of in an integrated way that puts fuel in my tank and also allows me to give back?
I love that. Well, that's the key. The balance is the key, because what it's like, we have a tendency to swing too far on the pendulum one way or the other. But I mean, if you can meet someplace in the middle, that's the sweet spot.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So that's gradiosity. So moving right along, because I know we've got a little more ground to cover. So last but not least, we've got possibility. And possibility is about effectively navigating the relationship, or the paradox, if you will, of risk and opportunity. So anytime we entertain a new possibility of what could be, the 5th practice of particularly resilient people tells us we get to navigate this paradox of risk versus opportunity.
Oh, versus opportunity. Okay, got it. Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Love it. Okay. So we've got the 5. Now, this you have made into a book, a course, correct?
Yes.
So you can either buy, and are both, which is the book? The book is out right now, right?
No, the book is not. The book is not out. Books take a long time to publish.
Okay. So is the course is coming out then?
Course is launching next month. Yeah, course is launching in December.
And where can they can go to your website to get the course?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm trying to think, I mean, just off the top of my head, if somebody has the course, why would they need the book?
Well, I think the book is going to really crystallize. We're doing the course first because this is a great opportunity for us to interact with our audience, to, have the private Facebook group, to do the
group okay. Coaching. All right. So it's going to be, is it going to be like is it a group coaching kind of course or is it like video courses?
It'll be video courses where I will also go live on Facebook. I believe at this time we're planning on once a month.
Okay.
And so this is a really nice way for us to interact with our audience and hear from our audience. What's interesting, what's meaningful, what's beneficial, what do you want to know more about? What are the stories that really inspire you? And so, you know, a course is evergreen and it's like pretty easy to go in and like re-record a module or create a new, you know, challenge or experiential exercise. Once we publish the book, you know, that's more like.
The book is more like your Bible. So you have it.
It's more static. Maybe it's like kind of harder to change until you do the next edition. So the book will be like a sort of a lower priced ticket item, if you will. And it'll also be an opportunity for us to really have crystallized through the course what's meaningful and valuable to people, and then distill that into the book.
And you mentioned that in the beginning of the interview too. So it's going to be more price effective for people. So people that maybe can't afford the course, they can just buy the book.
That's right.
So the course is launching, isn't it December 7th?
Mm-hmm.
December 7th. Okay.
Yeah.
And they can find that on your podcast. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah, our podcast is called Flourish or Fold: Stories of Resilience.
Okay.
Where we are talking to well-known people who are telling their lesser well-known story of resilience. And so this is meant to be, inspirational and motivational. Because so often, like, I don't know about you, Tina, but like I'll look at someone that I admire who's at the top of their game or on a stage, and I'll think, wow, like, you know, it's really hard sometimes to know the backstory, right? To sort of see the outtakes or the behind the scenes. And so in getting to hear people's stories of resilience and how they actually got there, it's incredibly motivating for me. And I thought it'd be incredibly motivating and compelling for others to get to hear some of these lesser well-known stories of resilience.
Yes, that's not mainstream media. Not that everybody. Yes, exactly. Like the backstory.
Yes.
Yes. Perfect. I love it. Okay. And what is the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah. You know, we're posting pretty regularly, like daily on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
What's your handle? Tell everybody what your handle is on Instagram.
Instagram, it's at Dr. Taryn, Taryn Marie, Marie, at Dr. Taryn Marie.
And you're so smart to not have put your last name. Yes, your handle, because your last name is pronounced much different than it's spelled. But yeah, I'd love that, Dr. Taryn Marie. So at Dr. Taryn Marie, that's your Instagram handle. And then tell us your website. Your website is your name, correct?
Website is Resilience with a C, resilience-leadership.
That's okay. So everything, the book would be on there once the book comes out. The courses would be, that's where you would go to sign up for the courses. And what about your podcast? Which platforms can they hear your podcast on? Yeah,
it's on all the platforms. We've got a landing page on our website for the podcast where you can access those platforms, and we're on Apple and Spotify and Stitcher and all the things. And we also have a pre-registration landing page on our website as well, where I think you get 10% off of the course when you pre-register. Yeah, I know.
Perfect. Okay. So that's between now and December 7th. So if they do it between now, they get how much of a discount? Do you know?
10% off, which is actually $100.
Oh, fantastic. I love it. Okay.
Yeah. And we will have a referral program as well. So people who are excited about the course and want to share it with other people, they'll be able to share that 10% discount with friends and family. And then they will also get 10% of the investment of the course given back to them to say
to them. Perfect. I love it. Great business move. All right. Any last, I usually say 3 takeaways. I mean, you've given us so much to chew on. I mean, we already got 5 takeaways, but is there anything more that you want to add to that?
You know, I'll just mention one other thing, which I think is really relevant to the work that you're doing, Tina. You know, we talked about this notion of fear. And I think a lot of times fear gets a bad rap. There's a lot of like hashtag fearless, push out fear, get rid of fear, throw fear out the moving car window kind of thing, and, never let it come back. And what I like to share with people is fear, like any emotion, has utility, has benefit to us. And in fact, really important aspects of our human experience can't occur without fear as a prerequisite. You know this, right? So we can't be courageous without first being afraid. We can't be brave and, fear is not present. And so what I like to do is operate from this perspective of what scares us is sacred. This idea that it's those things that scare us, that rather than being something that we should move away from,
move towards it, go towards the light. Yes, go towards it, right?
It's signaling that rather than being something we should move away from, it's likely our most sacred opportunity for development and growth.
Development. I almost said, you know what? I'm so on the same page as you. I mean, it's indicating what needs to be healed, what needs to be strengthened in our life. That's all it is just an indication of, otherwise it wouldn't be scary. And then once you heal it and once you strengthen it, then you can move on. But and understand that there's always going to be a new one, because if you're moving forward in your life, you are going to feel fear. If you're not, you've got your head in the sand, well, good luck to you. But, that's not going to be any life worth living, right? I mean, as Socrates said, an unexamined life is not a life worth living. It's kind of the same idea, right? So I love that. I'm glad that you ended with that concept. Perfect. Well, so thank you so much for being here. And I wrote them all down. And
you're such a good student, Tina.
I think I am. I used to not be, but I am now. I'm learning my lessons well. So anyway, thank you so much for being here. And all my listeners and viewers, thank you so much for being here. If you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so. It's Tina Marks TV. And if you haven't downloaded my podcast, please do, and leave a review. And any comments, I read them all, and it's very helpful. So thank you for tuning in, and we will see you next week. And thank you so much, Dr. Taryn.